Welcome back to the Pelvic Health Summit. I'm your host, Hannah Matlock, and today we are here with Alexandra Milspaw, a certified sex therapist based in Pennsylvania. Thanks so much for coming today.
Thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to be here.
So can you first tell us how you got started in this career, in this field?
Yes. I think it all started when I was young. I'm the daughter of a judge who had a lot of stalkers, so I became fascinated with trauma, understanding trauma with my own experience. And then when I was a teenager, I had a friend that was sexually assaulted, and my sister who was actually assaulted by an exchange student that lived with us for many years. And so that created my passion of just understanding why that happens and wanting to be able to help support women that happened to. And then when I went to college, I started with a group of people. I got together with a beautiful group of people at the Women's Center, and we started something called Break the Silence, which was the 24/7 crisis line and sexual violence crisis line and peer education group. And then I found that I just really loved doing that work. I loved helping women in trauma. I loved being able to get them the resources that they needed. And through my work with that and the Vagina Monologues productions, I learned how powerful women's groups can be. And so that led me to want to just go into counseling. So when I was getting my master's in counseling psychology, then I met Gina Ogden, Dr. Gina Ogden, who was a internationally renowned author and sex therapist. And so she has something called the 4D wheel. And when she presented the 4D wheel at my women's health class, it was love at first sight, and I didn't even know sex therapy was a thing. So then I found out about Widener's program, and so I went to Widener and got my PhD at Widener, and while I was getting my PhD, I met Dr. Robert Eckenberg, who happened to be in Bethlehem, where I lived, and he was a chronic pelvic pain and sexual pain physician, so he was an OBGYN, and that was his main specialty, and it turns out he was one of the country's specialists. So then I ended up working with him for about 4 years and trained under him, and that's how I met Amy Stein, and then met the world of International Pelvic Pain Society, and my first time I went to a conference, I just fell in love with the IPPS because they really understood the multidisciplinary approach and they respected all fields. And so it was the first time I was able to be in a room with therapists and physical therapists and urologists and gynecologists and and GI doctors and rheumatologists and pain management, and all of us were just really able to have a great conversation on how we can work together. And so then I just started my own practice, and really it went off from there.
Amazing. And we've been talking a lot about that throughout all of the interviews, how important the care team and the care team as a whole plays in healing chronic pain, and how it takes a therapist and a gynecologist and a physiatrist and all of these components to really help someone heal fully.
Yes, absolutely.
So you do a lot of work that relates to the mind and chronic pain. Mm-hmm. Can you explain how the brain plays a really, really large role in chronic pain throughout the body and pelvic pain in specific?
Yes, absolutely. So well, first, the way I got started into understanding the brain and mindfulness was not only through Robert Eckenberg and his understanding and his exposing the concept to me through the trainings such as the Neuro-Orthopedic Institute, it's called the NOI group, training of it called Explain Pain. So he's the one that originally introduced the importance of understanding the neuromatrix and what all is happening in the brain when it's in pain and in response to pain. And when I went to that training, what I found fascinating was it's the same parts of the brain that are responsible for the perception of pain are the same parts of the brain that are involved in emotional regulation and the reaction in trauma. And so my background in counseling and understanding trauma and pain just really kind of connected the dots there. And when I was actually at my graduation party for my master's, I met someone called Dr. Charlie Curtis, and he introduced me to Neuro-Linguistic Programming and mindfulness. So when I was doing my training in human sexuality and sex therapy, I was also getting the training in Neuro-Linguistic Programming, and there were so many bridges that I was making the connections to, but I wasn't being taught that in in schools. So therein lies my passion of bridging the gap between the psychological and the medical communities. But in being able to understand both of those worlds, we found that, again, the same parts of the brain that are responsible for pain are also responsible for emotional regulation and understanding what's happening in the moment. And so the parts of the brain that change with chronic stress or trauma or chronic pain all, again, are involved with pain perception. So if the hardware is changing, then we're not able to update the software. And so what I was learning in grad school as far as cognitive behavioral therapy and even with physical therapists, teaching, needing to change habits of movement and habits of thought with cognitive behavioral therapy, I'm thinking, okay, how are we helping them update their software if we're not helping them update their hardware? And so I was hearing from a lot of clients, as well as in the research, I was reading all this literature on this word called catastrophizing, why patients were catastrophizing their experience, and a lot of judgment towards patients that they were not trying hard enough, or they just had to think positively and they just had to change their way of thinking. And I felt that was really judgmental towards patients and not really understanding how difficult it was to do some of the things that both therapists and physicians were expecting them to do, which was think differently and move differently. But when I was understanding how the brain was changing and how we're not rehabbing the brain, it made complete sense as to why that was hard for patients. And so then the more I delved into the mindfulness training and the mindfulness literature and the research that was there, some of the fMRI studies that started coming out about 10 years ago started talking about these parts of the brain that they found were changing shape and changing function with the mindfulness brain exercises. And those were the exact same parts of the brain that had changed with chronic pain. So I started making that connection, and then many authors that started writing books. I didn't have time to write books, but many other people I found were starting to make that connection as well. So again, the same parts of the brain that change with chronic pain and stress and trauma are the exact parts of the brain that heal with the mindfulness training. So then I started really delving into the research on, okay, how can we really start to integrate mindfulness training into every single aspect of when we're treating not only trauma but also chronic pain. So that's what I really, that's what I try to preach about to both therapists as well as physicians, is how can we get this training on board as quickly as possible, as soon as we know that a trauma has happened or as soon as we know that someone's experiencing chronic pain. We need to help them update the hardware in order to update the software. And the research has shown that once they start, all of a sudden they start feeling better faster, and they feel, okay, yes, therapy is working, or physical therapy is working, or these nerve blocks or medicine is helping, because these parts of the brain are involved in habit formation. And again, if the brain is stuck in a certain position, it's not able to change. And so the patients and the physicians were getting false feedback, right? In the beginning, they were getting that false feedback of, okay, well, the patient's just catastrophizing and they don't want to get better. And there's no patient that's in pain that doesn't want to get better. So again, that's what I'm passionate about, is helping all the worlds understand the importance of updating and helping the brain to be able to get that accurate feedback of, oh, I can change my thoughts, I can change my pain experience, I go from suffering to pain, but I can even decrease pain. So we need to help heal the brain.
So how do you help your clients and the people that come into your office to practice mindfulness and eventually learn to rewire their brain after they've been suffering so long from chronic pain?
I start with education, because I know for me, if I just was told to do something, whether it's an exercise or whether it's a diet or whether it's positive thinking, I need to know, I want to know how is it going to work in order for me to feel motivated to do that. So I always start with education and really helping the patient connect the dots with their experience. So I start with teaching them how pain is processed in the brain, and that segues into what parts of the brain are involved, and that segues into, hey, these are the parts of the brain that actually change with chronic pain and stress and trauma, and most people in chronic pain have a history of cumulative trauma and high stress. And so that kind of connects the dots with, okay, and the only thing that helps heal the brain is the mindfulness training. So that's why I'm going to ask you to do these brain exercises. And some of the first responses that I get is, well, I'm not a meditation type of person, as if it takes a certain personality trait to practice brain exercises. But the approach that's out there as far as the talking about mindfulness, it is talked about more so in a meditative, peaceful Zen yoga type of state, which is great, and I'm all about that. But when I'm working with someone that's working 60 to 70 hours a week and is just not used to that type of lifestyle, it's really hard for them to think about sitting on a meditation pad with their legs crossed and blanking their mind out. So I really start with helping them understand there's a variety of different ways to practice mindfulness, and we usually start with more active mindfulness techniques, so people still feel like they're doing something, and it seems it's easier to integrate into their daily life. And that pretty quickly segues into more of the meditative mindfulness practice. I do tell them that the research on mindfulness is based off of meditative approaches, the meditating mindfully for 20 minutes a day, for 30 days, and that's what the research is on.
So that's how long you need to practice it in order to see results?
Yes. But I do find, to see results that really stand out, right. That, as far as when we're looking at fMRI scans and right. seeing the brain change, the research is based off of 20 minutes a day for about 15 to 30 days.
Got it.
Depending. But I find in my practice that if I can get clients to practice, even sprinkle it throughout their day, say, okay, let's do 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes over lunch and 5 minutes at dinner time and 5 minutes, or I've even, I do a lot of presentations to lawyers, so they are counting every minute of their day, and it's really hard to get them to find that 15 minutes. So I say, okay, every hour on the hour, just give me 60 seconds. 60 seconds to focus on your breath, or 60 seconds to play I Spy with all of your senses. And they soon come back and say, okay, well, I did that for a week and it felt really good, so then I found 5 minutes. And then that motivation starts to happen because they start to feel that relief, and then they make the time, right? If I find that if someone comes in my door that's type A and high energy and very busy plus in chronic pain, I say, okay, 20 minutes a day, it's really hard for them to put that, to create that automatically right. in their day. So we sprinkle it throughout in the beginning. That tends to motivate them to do more on their own. And then when they do more, the more they do, they find the better they feel. And then their brain starts to change. And so I motivate them with the education of helping them understand how that process is going to happen, and to set up that expectation of, get about 21 to 28 days to feel easier and to really get into your daily routine, but start to notice some of the differences that you start to have. Differences not only in pain level, but in agitation or depression or anxiety levels, and their sleep. Sleep is usually the first thing to improve when we wow. increase the mindfulness practice. And we know that we need to get the body sleeping if we want the body to heal.
Yeah. What are some of the mindfulness techniques and brain exercises that you have your clients do?
Well, the first I start with is the breath. And one time I was doing a presentation and I heard someone in the front row roll their eyes and they're like, oh, she's going to talk about breathing. And I started laughing. And I said, yes, I am going to talk about breathing because the breath is the only part of the autonomic nervous system that we can gain conscious control over. We can think really hard. We can't think really hard and control our heart rate, right? We can't think really hard and control our sweat glands or our digestion or our metabolism, but we can think consciously about our breath and control that. And if we lengthen the breath and slow the breath down, the rest of the autonomic nervous system comes with it. And we can't divide up the autonomic nervous system. So with the autonomic nervous system calming down, we calm the whole system, and that usually tends to decrease pain, at least in that moment, and create kind of a calming effect. So I start with the breath because of that reason, and the breath is always with you. You can't forget it at home. So it's a point of focus that people can use to bring their attention into the present moment. So mindfulness is paying attention in the present moment without judgment and without necessarily trying to change anything. It's really about becoming the observer of your experience. Commonly, there's 3 circles, right? There's the circle of the past, the circle of the present, and the circle of the future. And commonly, most of us are stuck in either the past or the future. We're thinking of the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. What do I wish that would have happened in the past differently? And the future, as far as the what ifs and the anticipation and prevention of something scary happening and planning ahead. And so the present moment really gets left out. And so visually, when I draw that diagram, I say, okay, the intention of mindfulness is to notice what the future part is trying to take your attention to, or notice what the past part of your brain is trying to bring your attention to, and say, okay, thank you for letting me know, and now I'm going to bring it back to that middle part, bring it back to the present moment. So the breath brings you back to the present moment, and that's usually something simple that people can try, and that brings in the diaphragmatic breathing. So my PT friends appreciate them, both of us being able to talk to patients about talking about the breath and diaphragmatic breathing. And then that moves into playing something like I Spy with all of your senses. So I'll say, okay, take 5 minutes to notice what you see, notice what you hear, notice what you smell, notice what you taste, notice what you feel kinesthetically. Can you feel the bracelet around your wrist? Can you feel the necklace around your neck? Can you feel the temperature of the air against your skin? And just checking in with those 5 senses can be enough to, okay, kind of bring us back. But there's a variety of other things, certainly yoga or any type of mindfulness-based exercise where you're paying attention to what you're doing. I'm a huge fan of Qigong, particularly for chronic pain patients, because it's a slow, mindful movement and you're moving the energy. And it's not performance-based, so everyone feels confident that they can do some of those movements. So you're getting the movement and the energy shift and the mindfulness practice in something like Qigong. Barbara Fredrickson is a researcher, and she actually found that when you pay attention to what you're doing when you're exercising, there's something called the brain-derived neuroregenerative factor. And I might be saying that wrong, but BDNF. So when you pay attention, to what you're doing when you're exercising, there's something that happens that doesn't happen when you're mindlessly exercising. And the shift is we actually increase this process that happens in the brain that actually decreases inflammation and speeds up neuroregeneration, which is, again, when we're trying to shift habits of thought or habits of movement or the habit of pain, because pain is a habit within the nervous system. We want all that to happen. So mindfulness based exercise can really bring that in. So mindful movement, again, any type of active mindfulness I start with. Mindful breathing, mindful movement, mindful eating. How can we really enjoy this delicious cup of water, cup of tea, or I joke about enjoying that $6 cup of Starbucks coffee. Each drink is about 25 cents, so we might as well enjoy the sip on the way down. And then from there, I get the feedback, and I listen to the patients to when that feels comfortable. And then I'm starting to hear the feedback of, I notice just feeling quiet. Or I notice that I become aware of my thoughts, and I start changing my thoughts. And that's what cognitive behavioral therapy is all about. We can't change our thoughts if we don't know what we're thinking, right? So we need to bring our attention to the present moment to say, what am I thinking? And now I have an option to change the channel. And so then we get more into the meditative practices, and that's something that looks like the body scan or visualization. I create my own personalized meditations for folks, so I bring in their own experience or their own memory of a time when they felt safe and peaceful, and I tie that into a mindfulness-based meditation, and then I usually end up adding some hypnotic suggestions at the end. So it is a personalized hypnosis tape, but it is ultimately a mindfulness-based meditation that heals the brain and does a little bit of subconscious work at the same time.
Wow. And going back to the breath, I always think about how important it is, and my physical therapist years ago told me that, which makes so much sense, that anyone who's in pain isn't thinking about the breath because they're just tensing up their body. They're tensing up, for people who have pelvic pain, their pelvic floor muscles.
Yes.
And they're in this state of contraction, of their whole body's contracted, and breath isn't able to flow throughout their body.
Completely.
So you have to really learn to actively focus on breathing and letting the breath flow and go throughout your pelvis and throughout your lungs and your body, and even when we're sitting here, it's something I have to think about. I could go, obviously I'm breathing, but I'm not thinking about it. I'm not actively doing it.
Exactly, and that's a really good point, because yes, breathing is a habit, and we don't think about it because it happens automatically. But when we pay attention, we finally notice, oh, I'm holding my breath and I didn't even realize it. And when we increase the breath, as you've potentially have experienced, we notice then the muscles that are tight, and we can intentionally be able to help them drop. And with pelvic pain patients specifically, when the pelvic floor has been in spasm, which is what pelvic floor dysfunction is, that actually can stop the diaphragm from being able to move down the way we want it to and need it to take a deep breath. So a lot of my chronic pelvic pain clients say, well, I try to take a deep breath, but I can't. And I said, you're right, because the diaphragm is a little stuck. That's why we want to work together with your pelvic floor physical therapist to be able to help release the pelvic floor so the diaphragm can move down, so that way you can breathe. But we can also massage ourselves from the inside out through the breath, by intentionally breathing and putting our bodies in an open posture and really helping open the chest. But breathing is like posture, right? How can we help ourselves have a better posture and to be able to breathe? And all of that goes hand in hand with paying attention to what we're doing in the moment, because that's the only opportunity we have to change something.
Can you talk a little bit more about the hypnosis work you briefly mentioned?
Sure. So hypnosis is basically meditation with suggestion. Anytime you add an intentional suggestion during a meditation, that turns it into hypnosis. So I could talk you through a whole body scan, but at the end, when the mind and the body become relaxed, then I add in the suggestions. Because when the mind and the body become relaxed, we become more open to change. And when we become more open to change, our bodies and lives can more easily heal. And healing is a good thing. And that exact phrase is something I add into almost all of my meditations in the beginning. So a suggestion at the end might sound like, every day in every way, you're feeling better and better. I release the negative thoughts I no longer need. I allow the energy of well-being to flow through me like radiant health. And so sometimes I have my own suggestions, kind of token suggestions that I like to add into everyone's. But commonly, I will always ask the patient, what do you want? What do you want more of? What do you wish, if you could wave the magic wand and feel better, what might you say to yourself in that moment? And so adding in some of those phrases, or what they are wanting, what are some of the goals that they have, and adding that in at the end, again, kind of planting the seeds of the idea. I love this YouTube video. It was a remix on Mr. Rogers, and it's called The Garden of Your Mind, because he says, you can grow ideas in the garden of your mind, and it's a fun mix. But so I bring in that concept of, we want to just plant the seed of, it's possible for your body to heal itself, right? Improvement is possible. And when I say that again to the subconscious and the mind, when it's already relaxed, all of a sudden, the mind becomes open to that suggestion. When we're in fight or flight mode, or when we're feeling tense, and when we're in a lot of pain, if someone says, don't worry, it'll get better, it's really hard for the brain to hear that, because it's saying, well, how is that possible? Because I'm just in so much pain right now. So it's really about how we phrase it, and that brings in some of the tricks of neuro-linguistic programming and language patterns. But hypnosis can be really, really useful, particularly when we're working with strong habits in the system, in the mind, that have been there for a while.
And how does CBT play into the role of the work that you do?
Huge. So CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is absolutely necessary in what we're wanting people. We want to be able to reframe our thoughts and not just positive thinking, because when we just do positive thinking, there's what an author called Noah St. John, he calls the belief gap, right? So if I'm in pain and I say everything's great, the BS meter starts to go off in my brain that says, no, that's not true. But if we do some Socratic logic to get the person to be able to get to that positive thought, then the brain is able to grab a hold of it. Then our emotions and our energy is able to grab a hold of it.
And it makes sense.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. Because if we're thinking positively and not feeling it, we end up feeling more shame and more judgment towards ourselves, because, well, it's not working yet, right? Why am I not feeling better? And so it can be really frustrating and disheartening to clients if they're only doing CBT work without really trying to help bridge that belief gap. And again, so cognitive behavioral therapy, it brings in behavior. It's saying, how can I change my routine? What are some small micro steps that I can do to get to that ideal day that I want to be able to have, that ideal self-care routine? But if we're thinking, well, it's not possible, versus it is possible, I'm just not sure how to get there yet, right? Well, I can't heal, versus, well, improvement is possible. You know, it's helping people learn how to reframe things. And if they didn't learn that growing up, it's hard to know how to phrase things that still feel true and authentic to yourself, but offers an opportunity for shift and change.
And I've experienced years of my own pelvic pain, and never did I see a therapist or anyone to help with the mind and the mental aspect of healing. And the past few months, I've realized how crucial this really is, and I've learned CBT and how to reframe your thoughts and how beneficial it can be. Are there any pieces of advice or techniques that you can give to everyone listening that can help them understand how they can reframe their thoughts?
Yes, so two favorites. One, the emotional ladder, and two, REBT, so rational emotive behavioral therapy, but it's very similar to CBT. So I'll start with the latter. So REBT has a chart that makes it really simple. A, B, C, D, E. So A stands for the activating event. What is it that triggered me? And maybe that's the pain, right? C being the consequence, so the emotional consequence. So that would be frustration, anger, shame, guilt for maybe I worked too hard yesterday and now I'm feeling guilty and shameful because I'm connecting that with the pain. So C being the emotional consequence. And commonly we blame the activating event on our emotion, right? I'm angry because of my pain. But that's not actually true. We're feeling that emotional consequence because of B, the belief that we have about that activating event. So I have people fill out that chart that says, okay, here's the pain, here's what I'm feeling, here's the belief that I can identify that I'm having about the pain, right? So I feel the pain and I believe this is gonna be forever. And that is actually what's triggering the anger and the frustration and the depression. So then D stands for dispelling that belief. So the dispelling belief, what is a different belief that I can try to reach for? Pain is not gonna be forever. Pain is just temporary, right? Maybe I can shift the belief to that. And then E stands for evidence. Can I identify any evidence that the dispelling belief could be true? So in that evidence, then they have to think about, okay, well, I did have a better pain day yesterday, so my pain can improve. Or, well, there is all those new research studies coming out about these medicines or these approaches, and I haven't tried them yet, so yes, it's possible. So then they're engaging themselves more on finding the evidence of the happier, more hopeful belief, rather than only focusing on the negative belief and finding all the evidence for that. So our brain is like Google, right? It will give you as many answers and evidence as you're looking for, and it's about asking our brain the right question. So if we're asking our brain, find me evidence that pain is chronic, we're gonna find tons of evidence for that. But if we say, find the evidence that pain is temporary and chronic pain can heal, that feels better. And we're integrating the frontal cortex. We get into problem solving and strategizing, and that actually helps the brain and the system get out of fight or flight mode. So we're doing not only shifting our thoughts and really being able to back it up with evidence and feel strongly about that, but we're also helping our system get out of fight or flight because we're problem solving. So that's one method. That's usually the first method that I do because it's easy for someone to fill out a chart and gives them something to work with tangibly. The emotional ladder is a ladder that lists emotions, literally in a ladder form, and on the very bottom is the lowest or heaviest emotions such as despair and deep depression. And then it goes all the way up to, it goes through worry and anxiety and anger and fear, and then pessimism, and then boredom, and then contentment, and then optimism, and then hope, and then love, and so the emotions get higher on the emotional scale. And that can either be more of a thought process, or someone can write it down. And I say, just start where you are. So where on the ladder emotionally, and they have to identify the emotion and say, okay, I'm feeling despair, or I'm feeling desperate, so they write a sentence. And then I say, can you go one step up? Okay, and I think that's anger. Okay, can you say what you're angry about that feels true? Sure. One step up. once, right? So we do one realm at a time, but what they don't realize is that each motion, that every time we go up a step up the ladder, we're actually lifting the emotion. And sometimes all they can do is get to maybe contentment or boredom. But if I had asked them to say, okay, here you're starting at despair, and now I want you to say a hopeful thought, again, there's that belief gap, and they can't authentically get there where they're actually feeling it. But if we go up the ladder 1 or 2 steps at a time, they're able to actually then get to that new positive thinking and positive reframe in an authentic way that feels true. And then they're like, wow, I feel better because I got there. But if I just said, well, everything will be fine, don't worry, or just think positively, it's very invalidating to their experience. So it's a more genuine process.
That makes a lot of sense. So a lot of people who have pain, I know I've had these thoughts personally, and I've talked to many people who have these thoughts. They can see someone who's risen above and who's healed and has moved on with their life, and to a certain extent they're able to practice reframing, and they're able to tell themselves, yeah, maybe this is temporary, I could get better. But I think there's another element that comes with it, which is, but what if I don't? What if I'm that one person who's never gonna get better? What if? I've had those thoughts. Everyone in pain has those thoughts.
Sure.
And that's, I feel like, one of the hardest things, because there's always is that what if. It's the uncertainty of being in pain. So how do you work with that?
So 2 ways. One, I provide a lot of case studies of proof, right? That even the worst case scenario can get better, because we want proof, right? We need to know lots of examples of possibilities in order to really, really believe that. And one of my favorite is actually a famous hypnotherapist, Milton Erickson. He had polio at age 8, and he wasn't supposed to live for a year. But he ended up learning how to train his brain and really work with his body and have compassion for his body, and he ended up living many, many decades later. So that's usually when I start with, because I'm like, look, back in the day, they didn't have any treatments for polio, they didn't know what they were gonna do, and he really learned mind control and the power of that. Now that's an extreme case, right?
But that's really interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'll start with case studies. Great case studies are also in, say, the book Lissa Rankin. She has a book called The Fear Cure and Mind Over Medicine. Dr. John Sarno, I love his book, The Mind-Body Prescription and the Divided Mind. And again, just case studies of how that's possible. So I put that out there. The second thing is the science of how we have a new body every 7 years. Right, so our body, just like a caterpillar is always growing and changing, and animals are, all of our cells are constantly replenishing and rejuvenating. And so if we know that we have a different fully cellular body every 7 years, then we really want to, yes, it might take 7 years, but let's really work on guiding the body of exactly where we want it to go.
That's crazy. I didn't know that.
Yes, right. So, and we know, say, for the GI, the lining of the GI system, the gastrointestinal system, that takes about only 3 to 4 weeks, and we can have a completely new lining. So then I go into a little bit of the science of your body is always changing. So it's impossible for your body to never change. So therefore, yes, it might take a long time, but how can we maintain that hope? How can we update our understanding and information on how can I change my body? What power do I have? What do I want to surrender to? And learn how to cope with what I can't currently change, but knowing that change is inevitable. And so again, how can I guide my brain and my system, and through practice physically, right, through physical habits, and mental habits, how can I guide my body to change the way I want it to change, rather than changing in a way that I don't want it to change? And sometimes I'll share a personal story in the sense of the power of how quickly the body can change. So a few years ago, I had 2 brain surgeries that were not planned, but when I was in a hospital bed for about 2.5 to 3 months, and so a lot of my muscles kind of disintegrated, kind of went away, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm never going to have my muscles back. Where does it go, right? If you don't use it, you lose it, and that's a real thing. But then through practice and through yoga and through exercise and through the stretching, right, the body rebuilds itself. And so whether it's an example like that or other examples that I think of in the moment, and I try to make the examples really poignant to the client that I'm working with, depending on their background, because that seems to help, just attach to the brain more as far as the story goes. So we start with case studies, and I go into the science of it's inevitable that your body's going to change. And yes, of course, anything's possible. It's absolutely possible you could be in pain the rest of your life. So let's think about how we want to find joy in the midst of that. Because that is something I also hear from a lot of clients is, okay, well, yes, I've been in pain for 10 years, but when I look back, I wish ... right? I wish that I would have still enjoyed 5 minutes on the porch rather than say, well, I can't go for a walk, so then I'm not going to go outside, right? We're trying to avoid that all or nothing thinking and saying, yes, we can notice pain and we can experience joy at the same time, right? This universe is about contrast. So even though there's dark, there's always light. Even though there's cold, it's hot somewhere, right? So where can we find where there's pain in the body? Where can we find that there's not pain? And I had a patient once that said, no one ever asked me that question, which was, well, where do you not have pain? Where do you not have pain in your body? And sometimes I've talked to people and they can't find anything except for the tip of their nose. And I say, okay, we'll start with that, right? So therefore it's possible for your body to not be in pain. Maybe it's just here, but that's a start, and then let's see if we can spread that freedom from pain.
That's fascinating and amazing. Thank you.
Yes.
And I want to quickly switch gears to your specialty, which is sex therapy. Mm-hmm. And clearly people who have pelvic pain struggle with intimacy and relationships and sex. Mm-hmm. So can you give 1 or 2 words of advice to those people who are really struggling and don't see that intimacy becoming something possible in their future?
Yes. I think outside the box. Mm-hmm. So I always put both either individuals or couples on the 4D wheel, Gina Ogden's 4D wheel, and I say, okay, sex in our culture is so much just in the box of the physical body. So the wheel is mind, body, heart, spirit. Mind being thoughts, knowledge, discernments, body being the physical experience, heart being the emotional experience, and spirit being the spiritual experience. And in sex research, we know that people have the best sex and the best intimacy when all 4 quadrants are involved. And so let's not only think of the tiny sliver that sex is only penetrative intercourse, that they can't do, right? And maybe orgasm and arousal is painful, and we understand that. But what are all the things in the body, in the physical quadrant, that can be pleasurable, right? There's a lot more, right? We need to think outside the box in that realm. But then let's also step into the other quadrants. Let's emotionally, what's happening in the relationship, how can we experience, again, increased joy, increase loving each other intentionally, increasing eye contact, increasing pleasurable emotional connection experiences. Spirit being the sense of connection and disconnection. So some people feel most connected when they're having sex. Some people feel most connected when they're going for a walk with their partner. Some people feel most connected when they're having an intellectually stimulating conversation with their partner or talking about their dreams. And so I really help them say and remember, what is everything that you enjoy about your partner, about your relationship that's happening in all the other quadrants, and let's expand what's possible in the physical body. So the wheel really gives a beautiful map on how can we really increase pleasure in a variety of different ways and think outside the box. A book I commonly recommend is 28 Days to Ecstasy. It's a tantra-based approach, but it's 28 days of all mindfulness-based exercises with couples. So it's harmonized breathing and eye gazing and mindful touch and mindful exploration of each other's bodies. That's not goal-oriented. That's not about performance. And that is huge when we're talking about pelvic and sexual pain. So it really shifts the sexual scripts that people are working with when they think about what is good sex. And once people really start talking, as far as the couple goes, they start realizing how they're both operating from these social scripts and sexual scripts that they've been taught, but they both are wanting to be more adventurous. They're both really wanting to think outside the box, but they're afraid that their partner doesn't want to, or it's not going to be enough. But once they start talking and realizing that they both really want to explore and try these other things and how that can be just as fulfilling, they both take a deep breath and they're like, oh, great. Okay, so you still love me, even though we can't do this small sliver of what sex is. We can do so much more.
It's so interesting you say that, because a friend of mine who's a sex journalist recently wrote an article about why older people, 70 and older, have the best sex of their lives. And it's because they're so much more focused on the connection and the emotions and touch and the aspects of intimacy that younger generations don't put as much emphasis on.
Yes, 100%. I love working with the geriatric community because they've released the social pressures of what is or what was, and they say, well, let's work what we've got. Right. Let's have fun. Time is short.
That's funny, but I think that we covered amazing information. I know we covered amazing information. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. Fascinating. And
my pleasure.
I know everyone listening will take a lot away from this. Where can you be contacted?
My website is 4dcounseling.com. So the number 4, D for directions. So it's 4 Directions Counseling is the name of my practice, but 4dcounseling.com.
Amazing. Thank you. Yes. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
And for everyone who watched this video, if you can relate, please leave a comment below and share it with anyone else who you think may benefit. Thank you.